know, former Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg, speaking at a local Republican event, issued criticism of Democratic leadership, urged Republicans to reclaim the county in 2026. 45-minute long address at a meeting of the Log Cabin Republicans at Houston. Kim spoke about the over-encroachment of the, quote, liberal government of the Democratic Party, her increasingly conservative tendencies over her 2 terms and future plans, including a potential nomination to serve as U.S. Attorney. Despite the critiques, she fired at her then Democratic counterparts, Harris County Judge Lena Hidalgo, Commissioner Rodney Ellis, and late Houston Mayor Sylvester Turner. Among them, Kim was quick to extend her support to former Houston Mayor Annise Parker's bid for county judge, who, by the way, said thanks, but no thanks. Kim has agreed to be with us here in studio today, and safe space. I'm not here to get ugly about anything, but what's going on these days?
Well, what's been happening with you, Frank and Ernie?
We started this show with
I'm just a nice girl who stumbled into a tough joint.
Yeah,
we're real tough.
Tell me
here.
about it.
3 broadcasters walked into a bar, and here we are.
Celeste stumbles into this tough room every day.
Every day.
Well, let
welcome
me
to
be
Holly
clear.
Houston.
Yes, please. You make the statement. We'll ask questions.
I remain a Democrat today. And I have become more and more critical of our party because of the platform and positions they've taken primarily on crime. I've also been very concerned about corruption and about the expenditure of money on unnecessary programs and things that Houstonians don't need at the expense of things we do need, like safe streets, like roads we can drive on. And so the gist of my criticism and my conservatism has come from seeing too many people harmed by individuals on bond, often repeatedly, while I was the district attorney. Frank, Ernie, we filed over 3,500 murders in 8 years. Do the math. It's more than 1 a day. I talked to hundreds of families over that time period because I felt like the district attorney's job was to personally extend support for crime victim surviving family members. I thought that it was important to tell them about the re-victimization of our system, which is nothing new to crime victims, but certainly has been exacerbated by lengthy delays in trials that we suffered, having not enough staff, operating on a shoestring budget, trying to run a system in a courthouse that wasn't functional for almost 5 years. And so those were the types of hardships after someone faced the murder of their loved one that I had to break to them. In trying to get relief for that, I often came to the Commissioner's Court asking for more resources. This has been painted as some kind of personal clash. It was not. Every department head who does their job in government goes in and fights for money. I guess y'all don't here at the radio station?
Oh, yeah, we do.
So that's just the nature of leadership. And we had a county government that was very interested in creating and reimagining the justice system while underfunding the justice system that we had. And that really was the big beef that I had. In terms of contracts and the way contracts were being let in Harris County, I had a big problem when we had complaints filed by legitimate individuals. Those complaints were investigated by Texas Rangers, cases presented by our prosecutors to grand juries made up of regular people who indicted. And so it's not the DA's job to decide whether we like somebody who's accused or whether we dislike somebody who's accused. The DA's job is to move that case forward into court. And I've been concerned about the dismissal of many of the cases, the folks who were accused of bribery of water department officials, folks at Midtown Redevelopment who are accused of stealing over $8 million from their neighbors. I was certainly concerned about the one-woman company that received an $11 million COVID contract because of the evidence in the case. So these were the types of concerns that I expressed. In terms of contracts and expenditures that have been being made over the last 4 years by the same commissioner's court, which is democratically led, I think we've seen a lot of expenditures that regular taxpayers would disagree with. And one of those is for a huge information integrated database, yet our county's website shows that only 1,500 people have been kind of entered into this program. So $38 million now, moving on toward about $50 million for a database with information. I don't know what it contains. It concerns me, especially in the face of all the voter fraud allegations by the Republicans. So I speak to any and every group that asks me. I've spoken to hundreds of groups over the years, Democratic and Republican. And so that's just kind of the latest smoke from the fire at the log cabin Republicans.
Well, that's what I want to touch on. You know, you're calling for the GOP takeover of Harris County. Then why stick with the Democratic Party?
Because if I change, I'll change when I want to. We see a purification of our party being led at the state level, at the local level. I disagree with that. I think there's always room for people with different perspectives within a party. And there were many, and are still, Democratic principles that I believe in. But there are many Republican values and principles that I believe in. And if those become overwhelmingly more reflective of me, then I will change parties. But not until I choose to, and certainly not because of pressure from within my party or by the Houston Chronicle.
It seems like that's the way it always used to be. Ernie can attest to this, that some people agreed with the Republicans' viewpoint, and they also agreed with some of the Democrats. And it was called compromise. And we seem to have lost our way when it comes to compromise. We're either this or we're that. Is that what I'm hearing from you? You want to be kind of on both?
Listen, I'm with about 75% of Americans who don't feel like the candidates on either side are working hard enough to get along and accomplish the work for really important problems that need solving. And I think Americans are tired of hearing why Democrats won't work with Republicans, why Republicans won't work with Democrats. So I want our money to be spent wisely by the people that we elect, not on things that we don't need. And I used as an example at the log cabin Republicans, murals, bike lanes that are unused in Houston for the most part. Things that Houstonians didn't ask for. We asked for safer streets, roads we could drive on, and neighborhoods that don't flood. And I think that's what's important for leadership, regardless of which party you're in. So having experienced the slings and arrows of outrageous political fortune, winning 5 races, losing 3 races in my lifetime, what I can tell you is Americans want their problems fixed, and they need leaders that will stand up for principled values.
You mentioned, Frank actually mentioned in the introduction, Annise Parker, your support of Annise Parker and her saying thanks but no thanks.
Yeah, and that's
Talk about that and your reaction to that. And did you know ahead of time that she would give that reaction knowing her?
Well, here's the deal. I got asked, what do I think about Annise's run for county judge? I think it's great. I did not specifically give an endorsement. I said she supported me when I was running, and I support her. And she's taken a lot of hits simply for her support of me. I think we see Mayor Whitmire taking hits within the Democratic Party for supporting police and fire, let's say over special interests, for more conservative Democratic positions that he's taken about our fiscal position in Houston. I think those things are welcome to Houston voters, but within the party, Democratic Party specifically, we've all been attacked for things like that. So the fact that Annise has to run in a Democratic primary, it just makes sense that she does not want a controversial Democrats support. And it doesn't mean that we're not friends. I'll always be friends with her. And in politics, we always say, I'll be for you or against you, whatever helps you more.
Well, which leads me to ask then, do you feel like the party, the Democratic Party, could be alienating you and pushing you away and out into a place of no man's land?
Well, they're not just alienating and pushing me out. There's many people who believe that our infrastructure, our public safety, that these should be the priorities of the Democratic Party, both locally and statewide. And unfortunately, we have not seen that. And so I think this last election reflects many people across Texas's dissatisfaction with the Democratic platform. You saw all those counties along the border of Texas go red. Well, it makes sense if you have open borders that are causing people problems, especially where they live and work, to be against that. I've talked to many legal immigrants who didn't like the party's position on illegal immigration and open borders. So when I was censured by the Democratic Party in December, it was for things like sending people to jail. Well, that is what the DA does. It was for taking a picture with a prominent Houstonian and our lieutenant governor and, at that time, Senator, Dean of the Senate. So because there was a high-profile Republican that Democrats disliked, Dan Patrick, in that photo, that was utilized. And mostly, the prosecution of public corruption cases against Judge Hidalgo's staffers was a huge driving undercurrent in that room. And let me say, it's no fun to be censured by anyone, especially when you run for office not to be somebody, but to do something. And what I wanted to do was reform our criminal justice system, and in many ways, I did that.
I want to remind everyone we're speaking with former Harris County District Attorney Kim Ogg, who's been making headlines herself over the last few days. If you have questions, please give us a call at 713-440-8870.
If I'm not mistaken, you endorsed Ted Cruz.
You're not mistaken.
Why? Especially given his anti-LGBT stance.
So I don't think we have to agree with each other on every issue. In fact, at our dinner table when I was growing up, we welcomed opposite positions. See my mom and dad. Boy, they had some really interesting discussions at the dinner table. He was against crime and filed legislation related to the border. I don't want to talk about the case right now that specifically, I think, was the tipping point in that legislation, but he filed congressional legislation to take illegal immigrants into custody and hold them without releasing them before we could find out more about their background. I supported that. I supported it in part because of all the families that I've talked to. Recently, Corporal Charles Galloway's murderer, another illegal immigrant, was convicted and sentenced to death for murdering the constable deputy in a routine traffic stop. It's one of the worst videos I've ever seen. And so Corporal Galloway did not deserve to be murdered. I think that could have been prevented with a stronger border policy by the Biden administration. Cruz was advocating for that, and I supported him for it. And I did so because if we can agree on one fix to a major problem, fix it, then we can move on to some of the other issues that perhaps we don't agree with today, but we might find middle ground if we just work together.
Now, you are facing possible contempt hearing over Jocelyn Nungaray's interviews that you did with Fox 26 as well as Fox News. Can you elaborate and tell us where that is at?
I can't elaborate. I can tell you I've done nothing wrong, and I'm just not allowed to talk about that case. But I want to assure the public I've been a crime victims advocate all my career because my mother was a crime victim, and I'll always be a crime victims advocate. So the last thing that I would want to do is something that would damage the crime victim, their case, et cetera. So, no, I can't talk about it.
And now, talking about the endorsement of Ted Cruz, and you related it to your mother and your father being, not necessarily aligning. Some would say Ted Cruz and essentially a typical Democratic party or someone that aligns themselves with that party would not even be within the same house. So how do you explain that Senator Ted Cruz isn't necessarily a middle-of-the-road type Republican? He is pretty conservative in the types of policies and legislation he puts forward.
So we both believe in the rule of law. Senator Cruz is a legal scholar. I've held a public position as the top law enforcement official in Harris County for 8 years, or I did. And my thought is this, that the polarization that we see in America is the result of exactly that kind of attitude that, oh my gosh, we can't even live in the same household unless we agree with one another. I'm in a 40-year relationship. I assure you my partner and I have not always agreed on everything. Know what I mean? Frank, Ernie?
Yeah, of course. But, when you say it like that, but the commercial endorsement doesn't go into the background of why you're really endorsing them. And so I think that's when people say, well, what the heck is going on here?
Actually, Frank, I did. I said Americans are tired of hearing why we won't work together to fix our problems. And I believed that the legislation he filed to help hold illegal aliens who crossed into America illegally before they could commit other crimes and before we knew their background was a sound issue. So I endorsed on that.
Not to relitigate all of this, but just curious, Colin Allred was too far away from positions you believed in, and Ted Cruz was closer to more positions you believed in?
On crime, Congressman Allred had a far different record than Senator Cruz did. And I became far more conservative after talking to hundreds of families of murdered children, of murdered spouses. I saw the damage that bail reform here locally applied like an experiment on us and without really much empathy for the victims had done. And I disagreed with it. So we fought it in court. We fought it in the court of public opinion. And that was a huge part, really. That was the primary reason for my endorsement. But I also believe in the rule of law. I don't like every law that we have in the state of Texas. But as the top law enforcement official, it's not about my opinion. It's about following that law. And we did.
Mm-hmm. I want to ask you about the Ken Paxton case. What was your take on that?
So I'll tell you what I told everybody who would ask me about cases out of Harris County. Didn't follow it because I had plenty on my plate here. And without sitting through and seeing the evidence in a case, you can't base your opinion on what you hear, no offense, on the media. That's why jurors are told by courts, don't turn on your TV during the course of your service as a juror. Don't read a newspaper because, of course, people are influenced by that. But it's not the same as listening to testimony or seeing the evidence yourself and being able to make an actual educated opinion when it is going to have a permanent effect on someone's life.
No offense taken. If you have a call for Kim Ogg, 713-440-8870. We do have one from Deborah from Missouri City. Deborah, what's your question or comment for Kim?
Well, I just have a comment. It's not a question. I agree with a lot of things the district attorney is saying. And I'm kind of like on her side on a lot of the issues and what she's facing now. And I think a lot of Texans and a lot of people around the country are not necessarily Democrats anymore or Republicans. Most of them are independents. She sounds like an independent to me in her views because there are things that the Democrats are doing that Democrats really don't like, and Republicans on the same thing on the other side, because I think this is where the country is right now. Both parties are doing things that the people do not want.
Deborah,
so
thank you.
Don't we just say we're independent?
Yeah, we want to get some response
fair enough.
from the former district attorney. But I guess the question in there, too, is if we look at our political parties, they both seem to be moving very far to the extremes, leaving this big middle ground, which is what you were talking about. What happens to our political system if this continues on in this way?
You ask a really important question. And Deborah, thank you for your observations. I think you called it right. My father and mother both called me independent up until the days they died. I think they were right. But we don't have a third party in America, and it leaves many Americans without any other choice than the ones that the primary elections produce. Now remember, primaries, you must choose D or R, blue or red. There is no independent party to vote for. If there was, I think Deborah's right. I think a lot of people would say, you know what? I want to pick and choose on the fiscal issues, the social issues, the legal issues, and I'd like a smorgasbord as opposed to just steak or just potatoes. And so, you know, I think we've got to really look at our democracy in the long term and decide if gerrymandered districts, unlimited campaign financing, term limits, things like that are really the answer. Or should we be given more freedom with our vote, just like the questions that I'm asking? Shouldn't we be given more freedom to challenge our leadership when they spend money in a frivolous way or something that we disagree with, or when they pass laws that don't represent us fairly? Shouldn't we be given more of a choice? And I think that you're going to see a stronger movement. The problem with Middle America is we're all working. We are all working. We have families to raise. And speaking of that, I wanted to plug my new law firm, Gregor, Wynn, and Arnie. These guys are first-rate litigators. They've seen a lot of action on the prosecutorial and defense, of course, now defense side. They handle civil litigation, and I'm excited to be back in the practice of law.
So that's your future.
Yeah,
That's
are you
what you're gonna be
staying there,
doing?
or public office still?
No,
calling
no,
to
I'm
you?
staying there.
You're
yeah.
out of public office?
Well, I am right now. The reference to U.S. Attorney, people can submit their names. That is far different than being nominated by the President of the United States. So I submitted my name some time ago. I have no idea what the result of that will be, but I can tell you I'm right there with the rest of Middle America. I want to make a living. I love representing people aggressively, and I think that the rule of law needs defenders like me, and I believe that the public continues to trust me, to be on the right side of issues.
You're listening to Hello Houston. We are speaking with former District Attorney Kim Ogg. You can join the conversation at 713-440-8870. We did get a YouTube question from John Daly who asks, Kim, your thoughts on ICE immigration methods as an attorney. What is rules associated with agents using masks to cover their faces and presenting identification and badges as they make an arrest?
You know, due process is part of the rule of law. Whether masks and identifications are part of that due process is up to the federal courts. I think every action that the president is taking by and through ICE is being challenged by folks who want different outcomes or by lawyers who really believe that that's a violation of due process. And I have to leave that decision up to the courts. You know, I'm not trying to be a federal judge. I'm not running for judge or anything else at this time. So what I would tell you is we'll see. The courts are a real battleground right now. And I think everyone is following closely the decisions that judges make about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in terms of making arrests.
Quick question from Mike Kevin, who you know. How is Harris County being Republican going to benefit the majority of the people?
You know, I'm a pretty single-issue constituent.
Crime is what I'm hearing.
Crime and corruption are really what I'm concerned about. Corruption because you can see that it rots a democracy. When the public's trust is violated, They don't believe in government anymore. They won't show up for jury duty, and they damn sure won't vote. So I'm very concerned about corruption. Corruption is generally criminally related, and violent crime has been my focus for the last, 38 years. The reason is because my mother was kidnapped when I was a child by a serial rapist. She saved her own life by jumping out of the car that he kidnapped her in, and no help to him, she lived. There were no victim services for my mother. There was no trauma-informed counselors that could help her. And she had been a legal secretary. She went back to work for a time, but for the most part did not. We never discussed it at the dinner table, but I was raised by a crime victim. It changed my father's path from possibly going into the Peace Corps into running for public office. And he was a state rep and a state senator, a very conservative Democrat, but somebody who both believed in the Equal Rights Amendment and the death penalty. And so conflict is inherent in a democracy. And what I think we have to get away from is everybody's opinion. Let's stand on our own 2 feet based on the information that we can validate and verify as media. I'm a failed journalist, by the way. I have a journalism degree, but it drove me to politics because I was a slow writer, Ernie. So let me say, I think
me out there.
Ernie.
I think media has a big responsibility in the future of American politics and in our democratic
I want to
future.
grab another call, but before I do, I just want to clarify something. When you talk about if Harris County goes GOP, is that presupposing that Democrats can't have a strong stance on criminal law and things like that?
Well, let me say, I base my information on the experience that I've had as a professional. And it was Democratic lawmakers who held up bail reform in the last several sessions, and yet in this session, we saw bipartisan agreement by Democratic lawmakers, including many of the Harris County state reps and state senators, to reform bail, to allow the voters of Texas to decide whether judges should be able to hold individuals who are accused of violent crime without bond. We had heard from so many judges, we can't do it, we have to give them bail. Let me say, I don't want to litigate that here in the court of public opinion because Texans will get to vote on giving judges more discretion to protect us better by considering no bond for violent offenders. And that's good. And I want to thank both Democrats and Republicans for listening to crime victims who testified over and over at this last session in favor of those bills.
713-440-8870. Julio's online from the 3rd Ward. Julio, what's your comment or question?
Well, my comment is that I voted for this lady, right? I thought I think she was a very right person and mature in her way of working her position where she was. But she lost the last campaign, and all of a sudden she just flipped over to Republicans. That disappointed me a lot, very, very, very much. Disappointed me because I had a lot of hope in her in bigger positions, at least to be a senator or something. But the way she flipped over just all of a sudden because she lost, I don't think that was a good thing for her. She lose a lot of credibility for me.
Okay, Julio, thank you for that comment. Wouldn't it just be easier at this point to claim Republican as your party?
You know, if the easy path were the right path, then sure. But I told you, I don't think Texans like being told what we should do. So, Julio, I understand your disappointment. Let me say I have stayed officially in the Democratic Party until this very moment, and if and when I change parties, it will be on my own terms. I just don't have to agree with everything that my party does, and I feel blessed to have the freedom in America to express my dislike of certain positions, especially on crime and corruption.
Now, you have engaged in a very public-centered dispute around the investigation accusations related to the $11 million COVID-19 outreach contract and other matters with Judge Lina Hidalgo. All of Hidalgo's former staffers were reimbursed nearly $900,000 after this case, and she has accused you of abuse of power. What do you say to that?
I would suggest that Judge Hidalgo better understand the criminal justice system, that evidence cannot be based on political bias. Evidence is evidence. In the COVID contract case for $11 million, a one-woman company was voted to receive that contract over UT Health. And the evidence against Judge Hidalgo's staffers were their own communications, one of which, and this is public record, read, make sure UT Health loses. Now, we call this colloquially bid rigging. There were also failures to disclose by the other individuals indicted in those cases about contact they had had with regard to the scope of the contract. So we don't make up evidence based on political feuds. I'll reiterate, as I have many, many times, I don't know Judge Hidalgo. I don't have any personal relationship with her. My fight over money was simply like any other department manager who sees a deficit and goes in and fights for their employees. And to be able to better do their job, I wanted an increase in the number of prosecutors. That was denied, not just by Judge Hidalgo, but other commissioners. Commissioner Garcia, Commissioner Ellis voted it down. Commissioner Raddick and Commissioner Cagle at the time voted for it. So we've seen Democratic control of criminal justice funding and policies locally that have absolutely nothing to do with evidence in cases of bid rigging in unrelated things like COVID contracts. I had the same problem with the contract given to IBM by Barbie Robinson, the health director, who, by the way, I don't employ people, the health director at the county. The commissioners do. And their county administrator fired Ms. Robinson, not just over her behavior in directing a huge $19 million and later $29 million total contract to IBM, but in taking contracts herself in other counties to perform services while full-time employed at a big salary here in Harris County. So that's what the county administrator said she fired Ms. Robinson over. These are not things I have control over. I don't have contact with these people. I myself do not do the investigations. The Rangers did the investigations with members of our public corruption prosecution team. And to see these cases dismissed is disheartening to the public because they happen to believe that if they committed these crimes, they would go to jail. And they see a disconnect and a hypocrisy when government officials and their appointees or their employees receive more lenient treatment. In terms of the reimbursement, the commissioners have voted to reimburse anybody who was accused and later no-billed or found not guilty.
Unfortunately, we've got to leave it there.
All right.
The
Well,
time is
I disagree
taken.
with that reimbursement. I think that $900,000 could have been spent in different ways. And so, if anything happens to me, I assure you I'll be seeking reimbursement too.
Former Harris
Thank
County
you.
District Attorney Kim Ogg, thank you for joining us on Hello Houston.
Thank you.
Thank you.